It was a crisp October night in 2018, the kind where the air bites just enough to remind you winter's coming. I live in an old row house in Philadelphia, a narrow, three-story relic from the Civil War era, built back when gaslights were the height of technology. The place had character, sure, but it also had a weight to it, like the walls had soaked up every story from the past 150 years. The light fixtures still had their old gas pipes, though they'd been wired for electricity long before I moved in. The floorboards creaked like they were gossiping, and the attic smelled faintly of mildew and forgotten things. I'd been there 6 months, long enough to feel at home, but not long enough to know all its secrets. I'm an IT guy, 32, single, the kind of person who spends evenings debugging code or streaming old sci-fi shows. Ghosts, not my thing. I'd roll my eyes at those paranormal TV shows, all dramatic music and shaky cameras. But that night, around 2 a.m., something changed my mind. I woke up with a jolt, my heart racing like I'd been running in my sleep. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows through the curtains. I lay there, trying to figure out what had woken me. No noise, no dream I could recall, just this uneasy feeling like I wasn't alone. That's when I saw her. At the foot of my bed stood an old woman. She wore a long, high-necked dress, dark and heavy, like something you'd see in a museum exhibit labeled 1860s morning attire. Her face was pale, almost glowing, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold a century's worth of sorrow. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she stood so still it was unnatural, like she was part of the room itself. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat, and my hands gripped the sheets. She didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but her presence filled the room with a chill that wasn't just the October air. Slowly, she glided forward. No footsteps, just a smooth, eerie motion. She reached out, and I felt a cold pressure on my chest, like a hand made of frost. It wasn't painful, but it was heavy, like she was anchoring me to the bed. Her eyes locked onto mine, and she raised a finger to her lips, a silent command. Hush. Then, she turned and floated toward the wall, the one I shared with the house next door. She passed right through it, like mist through a window screen, and was gone. I sat up, gasping, fumbling for the lamp. The bulb flickered on, revealing nothing but my cluttered bedroom. Laptop on the desk, laundry in the corner, no trace of her. The clock read 2:07 a.m. I checked the windows, the door locked, undisturbed. I didn't sleep that night, replaying the moment over and over. Had I dreamed it? It didn't feel like a dream. It felt real, like she'd left something behind in the air, a weight I couldn't shake. The next evening, I was out back, tossing trash into the bin, when Tom, my neighbor, leaned over the low fence that divided our yards. Tom's a retired firefighter, mid-50s, with a Philly accent thick enough to spread on cheesesteak. He's the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back, but also argue about the Eagles for an hour. We'd bonded over beers and complaints about the city's trash pickup schedule. "Hey, man," he said, lighting a cigarette. "You believe in ghosts?" I froze, the trash bag still in my hand. "Why do you ask?" He took a drag, his eyes narrowing. "Last night, I was up late, couldn't sleep. Went out back for a smoke around 2 a.m., saw something weird in my yard. Looked like an old lady, dressed like she stepped out a history book. She was floating, not walking. Looked at me for a second, then drifted toward your place." My stomach dropped. I told him what I'd seen. The woman, the dress, the hand on my chest, the way she'd vanished through the wall. Our eyes met, and we just stared, a silent woe passing between us. It was like the world shifted, like we'd both stepped into something bigger than ourselves. "We got to figure this out," Tom said, stubbing out his cigarette. "This house, your house, they're old. Civil War old. But she's got a story." He was right. And that was just the beginning that IT was a gray Saturday morning. the kind where the clouds hang low over Philadelphia like they're eavesdropping on the city's secrets. Tom and I sat in the local library, a squat brick building a few blocks from our row houses, surrounded by musty books and microfiche machines that looked older than our homes. After our backyard conversation, we'd agreed we needed answers. The old woman, our ghost, had shaken us both, and the fact that we'd seen her at the same time, in different places, made it impossible to dismiss as a trick of the mind. I'm a coder, used to solving problems with logic, but this was something else, something that made my usual frameworks feel useless. Tom had brought a thermos of coffee, and we were hunched over a table in the history section, flipping through old city records. These houses, Tom said, his voice low, they've seen some stuff. Civil War, right? Bet you she's from back then. His Philly accent made every sentence sound like a challenge, but his eyes were bright with curiosity, maybe even a little fear. The librarian, a wiry woman named Mrs. Delaney, had pointed us to a stack of records about her street. Built in 1862, the row houses were originally home to working-class families, some tied to the Union Army. During the war, they'd served as overflow for a nearby hospital, housing wounded soldiers when a main wards filled up. I pictured our ghost, her high-necked dress and stern face, moving through those crowded rooms, maybe tending to the dying. It gave me chills. After an hour, we found her. A yellowed newspaper clipping from 1874, tucked into a folder of obituaries, mentioned an Eliza Hawthorne, a widow who'd lived at my address. She'd been a nurse during the Civil War, known for her tireless work with soldiers. The article was brief, but it included a sketch, a woman with a tight bun, deep-set eyes, and a face that looked like it had carried too much grief. Tom and I exchanged a look. It was her, no question. She died in your house, Tom said, tapping the paper. In her sleep, it says. Age 52. No mention of family. I leaned back, my mind racing. So why is she still here? What's keeping her? Tom shrugged, sipping his coffee. Unfinished business, right? That's what they say about ghosts. Maybe she's looking for something. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Eliza. I sat in my living room, the old gaslight fixtures casting odd shadows on the walls. I tried to imagine her life. Nursing soldiers, watching young men die, maybe losing someone she loved. The house felt heavier, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to understand. I wasn't sure I wanted to. The next day, I found myself back at the library, alone this time. Tom had a family thing, but I was hooked. I dug deeper, finding a ledger from 1863 that listed nurses at the makeshift hospital. Eliza's name was there, alongside notes about her dedication to the fallen. There was a mention of a son, Samuel Hawthorne, who'd enlisted at 18. No record of what happened to him. I jotted it down, my hand shaking a little. Was Samuel the key? Was she looking for him? When I got home, I told Tom what I'd found. He was in his backyard, raking leaves, his cigarette dangling, as usual. The son, he said. That tracks. She's got that motherly vibe, the way she looked at you. Maybe she's stuck 'cause she never found him. We decided to keep digging, but part of me wondered if we were stirring up something we shouldn't. The house didn't feel like just a house anymore. It felt like hers. It was a few nights later, around midnight, when I saw her again. I'd been up late, working on a coding project, the glow of my laptop the only light in the house. The row house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood. I was about to call a night when I felt that same unease from before, like the air had thickened. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the hallway just outside my bedroom door. Eliza looked different this time, not stern, but sad. Her pale face seemed softer, her eyes glistening like she was on the verge of tears. She wore the same dark dress, but her hands were clasped in front of her, twisting slightly, like she was nervous. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, and she didn't move. Just watched me, her gaze heavy with something I couldn't name. Eliza, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know why I said her name. Maybe because I'd spent all day reading about her. Maybe because I wanted her to know I was trying to understand. She tilted her head slightly, like she'd heard me, and then she glided down the hall toward the stairs. I followed, my heart pounding, my bare feet cold on the floorboards. She stopped at the base of the stairs, near the wall that separated my house from Tom's. She raised a hand, pointing at the plaster, then looked at me again. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I swear I felt the word more than heard it. Samuel. Then she passed through the wall, just like before, leaving me alone in the dark. I stood there, shaking. System. Chapter 3. The second sighting continued. Staring at the spot where she'd vanished. My breath was shallow, my mind racing. Samuel. Her son. The name from the ledger. Was she trying to tell me something about him? I grabbed my phone and texted Tom. She's back. Hallway. Said his name. He replied instantly. Be there in 10. Tom showed up at my door, still in his Eagles hoodie, looking as rattled as I felt. We sat in my kitchen, the old gaslight chandelier flickering above us, and I described every detail. Her sad expression, the way she'd pointed at the wall, the name I'd felt more than heard. Tom lit a cigarette, ignoring my no-smoking rule, and leaned forward, his elbows on the table. That wall, he said, exhaling a cloud of smoke. It's the one she keeps going through, right? Maybe there's something on my side. Like I didn't know a clue. We grabbed flashlights and went to his place, a mirror image of my house, all narrow stairs and creaky floors. In his living room, we examined the shared wall. It looked ordinary, plaster, a bit cracked, painted a dull beige. But as we ran our hands over it, Tom found something, a seam, barely visible, like an old doorway that had been sealed up. We tapped it, and it sounded hollow. Boarded up, Tom said. They did that back in the day, right? Turned these row houses into separate units. I nodded, my mind spinning. If this was a hospital during the war, maybe this doorway connected the houses. Maybe she's pointing us to something behind it. We didn't have the tools or the nerve to break open the wall that night, but we agreed to come back with a crowbar. Whatever Eliza wanted us to find, it was on the other side. It was a cold Tuesday evening, a week after the second sighting, when Tom and I finally tackled the wall. We'd spent days obsessing over Eliza, digging through more records, and talking ourselves into circles. I'd found another reference to Samuel, a muster roll confirming he'd enlisted in the 71st Pennsylvania Infantry in 1862, but went missing after the Battle of Antietam. Eliza's grief was starting to feel personal, like she was pulling me into her story, and I wasn't sure I liked it. Tom showed up with a toolbox and a six-pack, his way of keeping things light. If we're going to meet a ghost, might as well have a beer first, he said, cracking one open. We stood in his living room, staring at the sealed doorway. The wall felt like a barrier not just between our houses, but between us and whatever Eliza was guarding. We took turns with the crowbar, prying at the plaster until it gave way, revealing a layer of old bricks. Behind them was a narrow space, more like a closet than a doorway, filled with dust and cobwebs. My flashlight caught something glinting, a small, tarnished locket, half buried in the debris. I picked it up, my hand shaking. Inside was a faded photograph of a young man in a Union uniform, barely 18, with Eliza's eyes. Samuel, I whispered. Tom nodded, his face pale. We found something else, too, a bundle of letters, tied with a brittle ribbon. They were from Eliza to Samuel, dated 1862 to 63, begging him to come home, describing her work at the hospital, her fear he'd never return. The last letter, unfinished, was dated September 1862. It was a damp November evening, the kind where the Philadelphia fog clings to everything like a second skin. I'd been restless since finding the locket and Eliza's letters in Tom's sealed-up doorway. The weight of her story was sinking into me, making the row house feel less like home and more like a museum of someone else's grief. I couldn't shake the image of her sad eyes from that second sighting, or the way she'd whispered Samuel like a prayer. I needed to know more, and the house, I was sure, was hiding something. I was poking around in the attic, a cramped space I'd mostly avoided since moving in. It was a mess of dusty boxes, cracked furniture, and that mildew smell that seemed to seep from the walls. The light up there was a single bulb, swaying slightly from a draft I couldn't place. I brought a flashlight, half expecting to find nothing but cobwebs, but as I moved a splintered chair, I noticed a loose panel in the wall, barely visible behind a pile of old crates. My hands were clammy as I pried it open, the wood groaning like it was reluctant to give up its secrets. Behind it was a small, hidden room, no bigger than a closet, with a slanted ceiling and a single, boarded-up window. The air inside was thick, stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. My flashlight swept over the contents: a small wooden table, a rusted tin box, and a pile of faded fabric that looked like a nurse's apron, stained with what might have been blood. My stomach churned. I opened the tin box, my fingers trembling. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle but legible, and a small cloth bundle. The journal had Eliza Hawthorne, 1862 written on the first page. I flipped through it, my heart racing. It was her nursing log. Notes about soldiers she'd treated, their wounds, their names. One entry caught my eye. October 3rd, 1862. Private Thomas Miller, 71st PA Infantry. Leg wound, fever. Spoke of Samuel. Says he fell at Antietam. I cannot believe it. I will not. Samuel. Her son. The same regiment, the same battle. I sat back on my heels, the attic closing in around me. The cloth bundle held a bandage, stiff with old blood, and a tiny metal button, the kind from a Union uniform. I held it up, and that's when I felt her. Eliza was there, standing in the doorway of the hidden room. Her pale face was clearer now, her dress almost solid in the dim light. She pointed at the journal, her finger trembling, and her eyes, God, her eyes were pleading. I wanted to say something, to ask her what she needed, but my throat was dry. She glided closer, her hand hovering over the journal, and I felt that same cold pressure on my chest, like a weight pulling me into her world. Then she was gone, leaving a faint chill in the air. I took the journal and artifacts downstairs and texted Tom to come over. When he arrived, his usual swagger was gone. He looked at the journal, the bandage, the button, and shook his head. She's trying to tell you something, man. This is heavy. We read the journal together, page after page of Eliza's meticulous notes. She'd worked herself to exhaustion, tending to soldiers while waiting for news of Samuel. One entry, dated after Antietam, broke my heart. No word of my boy. I search every face, every letter, but he is gone. This house hears my prayers, but they go unanswered. Tom rubbed his jaw. We need help. Someone who knows this history stuff better than us. I nodded, thinking of the library. Mrs. Delaney might know someone. A historian, maybe. That night, I left the journal open on my nightstand, half hoping Eliza would come back. She didn't, but I dreamed of her, standing in a field of wounded soldiers, calling Samuel's name into the smoke. It was a brisk Saturday morning, the Philadelphia streets bustling with weekend noise, kids on scooters, vendors shouting about fresh pretzels. Tom and I were back at the library, this time with a purpose. Mrs. Delaney had connected us with Clara Nguyen, a local historian who specialized in Civil War-era Philadelphia. Clara was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense vibe, her arms full of books and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She met us at a corner table, her curiosity piqued by our vague email about historical research on our street. So, Clara said, pushing her glasses up her nose, you're living in a Civil War row house and think it's haunted? That's not a first for this city. I hesitated, feeling foolish, But Tom jumped in, his Philly accent thick. It's not just a feeling. We've seen her. Old lady, 1800s dress, floating around. She's real. Clara raised an eyebrow, but didn't laugh. Tell me everything. We laid it out. The sightings, the locket, the letters, the journal, Eliza's name. Clara listened, jotting notes, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. When I showed her the journal, she ran her fingers over the pages like they were sacred. This is incredible, she said. These houses were part of a network of makeshift hospitals during the war. Nurses like Eliza were the backbone of those places. If she's still here, there's a reason. She pulled up a digital archive on her laptop, cross-referencing our address. Your houses were used as an overflow ward in 1862 to 63, she said. Eliza Hawthorne is mentioned in a few records as a head nurse. She was widowed young, had a son who enlisted. No record of him surviving the war. Tom leaned forward. That's Samuel. She's looking for him. Keeps pointing us to stuff, letters, a journal, a gray marker we haven't found yet. Clara's eyes widened. A grave marker? In the backyard. Maybe, I said, describing the last sighting, how Eliza had pointed at the wall. We think she's trying to show us where he is. Clara closed her laptop, her voice low. I've studied this city's history for years. Sometimes spirits linger because of trauma, unresolved loss, guilt. If Eliza's son died and she never found closure, that could be it. We were deep in discussion when the air changed. The library, usually warm and stuffy, grew cold, the lights flickering. Clara froze, her pen dropping. I followed her gaze, and there she was, Eliza, standing by a bookshelf, her pale figure half-transparent. She looked at Clara, then at me, her eyes full of that same pleading sorrow. Tom grabbed my arm, hissing, "You see her, right?" Clara nodded, her face pale. "I see her." Eliza raised a hand, pointing toward the library's window, toward our street. Then she faded, leaving us staring at an empty aisle. Clara exhaled shakily. "Okay, I'm in. Let's find out what she wants." We left the library, a team now, me, Tom, and Clara, bound by a ghost we couldn't ignore. Back at my house, Clara pored over the journal, finding a mention of a backyard burial for soldiers who died in the hospital. If Samuel's body was brought here, she said, there might be a marker. We need to look. That night, I felt the house watching us, its walls humming with Eliza's presence. I wasn't scared anymore, just determined. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where the world slows down and you can hear your own thoughts too clearly. I was in my living room, the journal open on the coffee table, Clara's notes scattered beside it. Tom was sprawled on my couch, a beer in hand, while Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, transcribing entries. We'd become a strange little family over the past week, united by Eliza's mystery. I'd always been a loner, work, code, repeat, but having Tom and Clara around felt good, like the house was less empty with them in it. I've been thinking about my own life lately, how I'd moved to Philly to escape a dead-end job, and a breakup that left me raw. I hadn't realized how isolated I'd become until Eliza showed up, forcing me to connect with Tom, then Clara. Maybe she wasn't just looking for Samuel. Maybe she was pushing me to find something, too. Around 11 p.m., I felt that familiar chill. I looked up, and Eliza was there, standing by the window overlooking the backyard. Her dress was clearer now, the fabric catching the moonlight, her face etched with a mother's grief. She didn't look at me this time, just stared outside, her lips moving. I strained to hear, and there it was, faint but unmistakable, Samuel. "Guys," I whisper, my voice tight. Tom and Clara follow my gaze, and Clara gasped softly. Eliza raised a hand, pointing to the backyard, then glided toward the wall, vanishing as always. The room felt warmer without her, but her absence left a void. "She's out there," Clara said, grabbing her coat. "We need to check the yard." We stumbled outside, flashlights cutting through the dark. The backyard was small, just a patch of dirt and weeds between our houses, bordered by that low fence. Clara knelt, shining her light on the ground near the wall. If there's a marker, it'd be small, maybe just a stone. We searched for an hour, digging through overgrown grass, until Tom called out, "Here." He was by the fence, pointing to a flat, moss-covered stone half buried in the dirt. It was unmarked, but it didn't belong, a deliberate placement, not a random rock. Clara brushed it clean, her hands shaking. "This could be it," she said. "A soldier's grave, hidden all these years." I looked at the stone, picturing Eliza kneeling there, mourning. A memory hit me, not mine, but hers, vivid as a dream. I saw her in 1863, in a nurse's apron, standing in this yard, tears streaming as she placed that stone. A young soldier, barely alive, had been carried here from Antietam, whispering Samuel's name before he died. She'd buried him herself, hoping it was her son, needing it to be. I snapped back to the present, my eyes wet. Tom and Clara were staring at me. "You okay, man?" Tom asked. "She buried him here," I said, my voice hoarse. Or thought she did. "She's still looking for him." Clara nodded, her eyes soft. "We're close. Let's keep going." We went back inside, the weight of the night settling over us. Eliza was more than a ghost now. She was a mother, a woman who'd lost everything. And we were her only hope. It was a foggy December morning, the Philadelphia skyline blurred like an old photograph, when Clara dropped the bombshell. We were huddled in my kitchen, steam rising from coffee mugs, the journal and locket spread out like evidence in a cold case. Since finding the backyard stone, we'd been relentless, cross-referencing records, calling archives, even visiting the Antietam battlefield site online. Clara had spent nights poring over digitized muster rolls and casualty lists, her historian's instincts kicking into overdrive. "I found Samuel," she said, her voice steady but her eyes shadowed. "He died at Antietam, September 17th, 1862. Listed as killed in action, body unrecovered. Buried in a mass grave, probably." Tom swore under his breath, and I felt a punch to the gut. Eliza's son, just 18, cut down in the bloodiest day of the war. No wonder she lingered, never knowing for sure, never having a place to grieve. The backyard stone, then, wasn't a grave. It was a memorial, a desperate act of hope from a mother who couldn't let go. "How sure are we?" Tom asked, his hands clenched around his mug. Clara slid a printout across the table, a scan page from a Union Army report. "Samuel Hawthorne, 71st Pennsylvania, confirmed dead in the cornfield skirmish. Witnesses described the chaos. Men falling in rows, bodies piled high. No time for proper burials." I pictured Eliza, back in 1862, receiving the news. A knock at the door, a telegram, her world shattering. The journal's entries after Antietam were sparse, full of despair. "Word came today. They say he is gone, but I feel him still. I will wait." That evening, as dusk fell, I went to the backyard alone. The stone was there, cold under my fingers. I sat beside it, whispering, "Eliza, we know now. Samuel didn't come home." The air grew heavy, the fog thickening, and she appeared, kneeling by the stone, her pale hands hovering over it like she was touching her son's face. Her presence was intense, a wave of grief that hit me like cold water. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears that never fell, and I felt her pain echo in my chest. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. Help me. I stayed until she faded, the fog lifting slightly. Inside, I told Tom and Clara. "She's not at peace yet," I said. "There's more." Clara nodded. Unrecovered bodies were common, but sometimes survivors knew details. Maybe someone in Samuel's unit wrote about it. Tom shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. "My ancestor, James, he was in the 71st. Same company as Samuel." We stared at him. The pieces were falling into place, and it wasn't pretty. It was a tense Wednesday night, rain pattering against the windows like impatient fingers, when Tom finally spilled his family secret. We were in his living room, the sealed doorway now a ragged hole patched with plywood. Clara had brought takeout, cheesesteaks, a Philly staple, to lighten the mood, but the air was thick with anticipation. Since Clara's revelation about Samuel, Tom had been quieter, his usual jokes absent, his cigarettes chain-smoked. "My great-great-grandpa James," Tom said, staring at his hands. "He survived Antietam. Came home, but he was never the same. My dad had this old trunk in the attic, letters, medals, stuff. I never looked close until now." He led us upstairs, to a dusty attic much like mine. In a corner, under a tarp, was a wooden trunk, its lock rusted but openable. Inside were yellowed papers, a faded union cap, and a bundle of letters tied with string. Tom pulled one out, dated October 1862, addressed to Eliza Hawthorne. "It's a confession," Tom said, his voice breaking. "James wrote that during the retreat at the cornfield, Samuel was hit. He was alive, calling for help, but the Rebs were closing in. James, he left him, ran to save himself. Samuel died alone because of him." Clara read the letter aloud, her voice soft. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I cannot live with this burden. Your boy was brave, but I was a coward. Forgive me if you can." It was never sent, hidden away like the guilt. I felt a mix of anger and pity. Tom's ancestor had betrayed Samuel, left him to die. No wonder Eliza floated between our houses, her grief tied to both, to the nurse's ward and the coward next door. "Why didn't he send it?" I asked. Tom shrugged, tears in his eyes. "Shame, probably. He lived next door to her after the war, watched her waste away. My family stayed in this house for generations, carrying that secret." As if summoned, the chill returned. Eliza appeared in the attic doorway, her face twisted in accusation, eyes locked on Tom. He recoiled, whispering, "I'm sorry." She pointed at the letter, her form flickering like a candle in the wind, then vanished through the wall. The room was silent. Clara put a hand on Tom's shoulder. "This is why she's here. Unforgiven betrayal." Tom nodded, wiping his eyes. "We have to make it right." Our friendship was strained that night, the weight of history pressing down. But I knew we couldn't stop. Eliza wouldn't let us. It was a stormy Thursday afternoon, thunder rumbling like distant cannon fire, when we confronted the full truth of James's betrayal. The rain lashed the row houses, turning the backyard into a muddy mess. But we were inside Tom's place. The trunk's contents spread across the table. Clara had scanned the letters, cross-referencing with historical accounts, piecing together the puzzle Eliza had been urging us toward. "There's another letter," Clara said, pulling a sealed envelope from the bundle. It was addressed to Eliza, dated 1870, years after the war. Tom broke the seal carefully, and we read it together. It was James's attempt at redemption. "I have carried this for too long. Samuel was my friend. I left him, but I've tried to atone. I sent money anonymously, watched over your house. Please, if you read this, know I regret it every day." James had never delivered it, dying before he could. But the letter mentioned a fund he'd set up for war widows, including Eliza. He'd lived with guilt, trying to make amends in silence. "This changes things," I said. "He wasn't just a coward. He tried to fix it." Tom nodded, relief mixing with sorrow. "But she never knew. That's why she's stuck." We decided to deliver the letter symbolically. In the backyard, under the pouring rain, we stood by the memorial stone. Clara held the locket, Tom the letter, me the journal. "Eliza," I called, rain soaking us. James regretted it. He sought forgiveness. Samuel's story is known now. The wind picked up, thunder cracking overhead. Eliza appeared, standing by the stone, her dress whipping in the gale. She looked at Tom, her expression softening from accusation to something like understanding. She reached out, her hand passing through the letter, and I felt a warmth cut through the cold, a release. She nodded once, her eyes meeting mine, then faded into the storm. We stood there, drenched, silent. The rain eased, and for the first time, the backyard felt peaceful. It was a moonless January night, the Philadelphia cold biting like a reminder of winter's long past, when we gathered for the ritual. Clara had insisted on it, a way to give Eliza the closure she'd been denied for over a century. We'd spent weeks preparing, researching old customs, blending history with a touch of the spiritual. Tom was skeptical, calling it hippie stuff, but even he agreed we had to try. The backyard, dusted with snow, felt like sacred ground under the glow of lanterns we'd hung from the fence. We stood in a circle around the memorial stone, me, Tom, Clara, each holding an artifact from Eliza's life. I had the journal, its pages whispering her words. Tom clutched James's unsent letter of forgiveness. Clara held the locket with Samuel's photograph, open to catch the light. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the city held its breath. Clara began, her voice steady in the chill. Eliza Hawthorne, we call to you. We know your story now, your love for Samuel, your grief, the betrayal that shadowed your days. James sought forgiveness. He atoned in his way. Your son was brave, lost in battle, but remembered here. Tom stepped forward, unfolding the letter. I'm sorry for what my kin did, he said, his breath fogging the air. James left Samuel, but he regretted it. This letter was meant for you. Read it now, in whatever world you're in. I added my part, opening the journal to an entry about Samuel's enlistment. You waited for him, Eliza. You nursed the wounded, held the dying, all while hoping he'd come home. He didn't, but we honor him. We honor you. Clara placed the locket on the stone, and we linked hands. Let go of this place, she said. Find peace. Cross over. The wind stirred then, swirling snow around us like a veil. The lanterns flickered, and Eliza appeared in the center of our circle, her form more solid than ever, her dress catching the light like real fabric. She looked at each of us, Tom with forgiveness in her eyes, Clara with gratitude, me with a motherly warmth that made my chest ache. She knelt by the stone, touching the locket, and I saw a vision flash in my mind. Eliza in 1862, young and strong, hugging Samuel before he marched off. Then older, alone, placing the stone in the yard, tears freezing on her cheeks. The vision faded, and Eliza stood, smiling faintly, a first. She raised her hand in farewell, her finger no longer to her lips but open, like a blessing. Then she dissolved into the snow, drifting upward until she was gone. We stood silent, the cold seeping back in. She's free, Clara whispered. Tom nodded, wiping his eyes. Yeah, she is. That night, the house felt different. Lighter, warmer, like a weight had lifted. We shared a drink inside, toasting Eliza, our strange journey coming to an end. It was a warm April morning, spring blooming in Philadelphia, like a promise of new beginnings, when I finally packed up the last box. 6 months had passed since the ritual, and life had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The row house, once a creaky relic haunted by the past, now felt like a friend I was saying goodbye to. I'd found a new apartment across town, closer to work, but leaving wasn't easy. Tom and Clara helped with the move, turning it into a mini celebration. Tom hauled boxes, his usual grin back, joking about how the place would miss my tech gadgets cluttering it up. Clara organized everything, her historian's eye spotting a few more artifacts we'd overlooked, an old button hook, a faded postcard from the 1870s. We donated most to the local museum, ensuring Eliza's story lived on. Over lunch, pizza on the stoop, we talked about what came next. Tom had started researching his family tree more deeply, confronting the shadows James left behind. Gonna write a book or something, he said, or at least tell my kids the truth. Clara smiled. I'm petitioning to get these houses historical status. A plaque for Eliza and Samuel, right out front. Site of Civil War Hospital Ward, home of nurse Eliza Hawthorne. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. She liked that. As we finished, I took one last walk through the house. The walls seemed to hum with approval. No chills, no whispers. In the bedroom, where I'd first seen her, I paused. Thanks, Eliza, I murmured, for everything. A faint breeze stirred the curtains, carrying a hint of lavender. Her scent, I realized. Not a haunting, but a goodbye. Outside, Tom clapped me on the back. You okay, man? Yeah, I said. Better than okay. We'd become family, bonded by a ghost. As I drove away, the row houses shrinking in the rear view, I knew Eliza was at peace. But a part of her stayed with us, and the stories we'd tell, the connections we'd made. Epilogue. It was a quiet September afternoon in 2020, the world locked down by the pandemic, when I returned to the old neighborhood. 2 years had passed, but Philadelphia's streets felt timeless, the row houses standing sentinel as always. I parked outside, mask in hand, and stared at the plaque Clara had fought for. Hawthorne House, Civil War-era hospital and residence of nurse Eliza Hawthorne and her son Samuel. Dedicated to their memory. Tom waved from his stoop, socially distanced but grinning. Long time, stranger. Clara joined us via video call, her face on my phone screen. The museum exhibit opens next month. Virtual for now, but it's all there. The journal, the locket, James's letters. We caught up, sharing laughs about our ghost hunting days. The pandemic had isolated everyone, but it made me appreciate the bonds Eliza had forged. I'd started dating someone, a teacher who loved history, and Tom had grandkids now, telling them tales of the old woman who floated through walls. As the sun set, I felt that familiar chill, but gentle like a hug. A whisper on the wind. Thank you. Eliza wasn't gone. Not really. She lingered in the best way. In memories, in peace. Walking away, I smiled. Some stories never end. They just find new ways to be told. It was a crisp February evening, the Philadelphia air sharp with the promise of snow, when I felt Eliza's presence one last time. After the ritual, I thought we'd set her free. Tom, Clara, and I had stood in the backyard, offering her peace through words and relics. The house had felt lighter, the oppressive weight of her grief lifted. But as I prepared to leave for good, packing the last of my belongings, I realized her story wasn't quite finished. Or maybe mine wasn't. I'd been sorting through my desk, tossing old cables and notebooks into boxes, when I found a small, yellowed envelope tucked in a drawer I rarely used. It was addressed to resident, in a spidery script, no postmark, no date. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single page, dated 1874, in Eliza's handwriting. To whoever finds this, know that this house holds my heart. I could not leave while Samuel's fate was unknown. If you found my words, you've carried my burden. Thank you. I sat back, stunned. The letter felt like a gift, a final message from a woman who'd become more than a ghost to me. I called Tom and Clara over, and we read it together in the living room, the old gaslight fixtures casting a warm glow. Clara's eyes glistened. She wrote this for someone to find. For us. Tom nodded, his voice rough. She knew we'd care. That's why she kept showing up. We decided to honor her one more time. Clara suggested a final gesture. Not a ritual, but a promise to share her story. We contacted the local historical society, arranging for the journal, locket, and James's letters to be part of a permanent exhibit. But before we handed them over, we went back to the backyard, where the memorial stone stood like a silent guardian. Under the stars, we spoke to her again. Eliza, I said, holding the letter, your story's safe with us. Samuel's remembered. You're remembered. Tom added, James's debt is paid. Rest now. Clara placed a sprig of lavender, her scent, on the stone. You're not forgotten, she whispered. The air shifted, a soft warmth cutting through the winter chill. Eliza appeared, not as a sorrowful figure but radiant, her dress almost glowing, her face peaceful. She looked at the stone, then at us, her eyes holding a gratitude that needed no words. A vision flickered in my mind. Eliza in 1862, laughing with Samuel in this very yard, before the war stole him. Then in 1874, writing that letter, her hand steady despite her pain. She'd known someone would find it, someone would care. She raised a hand, not in warning, but in farewell, and dissolved into the night, leaving a faint scent of lavender. The backyard felt alive, not haunted, alive with her memory, her strength. As we walked back inside, Tom clapped my shoulder. We did good, man. Clara smiled. She's part of this place forever, but not trapped anymore. I nodded, feeling a closure I hadn't expected. The house wasn't just walls and history. It was a home, hers and mine, for a little while. It was a golden September afternoon in 2021, the world inching back to life after the pandemic's grip, when I returned to the old row house one last time. Philadelphia buzzed with its familiar rhythm. Street vendors calling, SEPTA buses rumbling, kids laughing on the sidewalks. I stood outside, staring at the plaque Clara had fought for. Hawthorne House, Civil War-era hospital and residence of nurse Eliza Hawthorne and her son Samuel. Dedicated to their memory. Below it, a new edition read, preserved by the community, 2020. Tom met me on the stoop, his hair grayer, but his grin unchanged. "Missed this place yet?" he teased, handing me a coffee. Every day, I admitted. I'd settled into my new apartment, started dating Emma, a history teacher who loved Eliza's story as much as I did. But the row house was part of me, a chapter I'd never close. Claire joined us via Zoom, her face beaming from a museum office. "The exhibit's a hit," she said. "People come for the artifacts, stay for Eliza's story. We're planning a lecture series next year." We walked through the house, now a community center for history buffs and locals. The creaky stairs, the gaslight fixtures, they were the same, but brighter, filled with voices and purpose. In the backyard, the memorial stone was polished, surrounded by a small garden. Lavender bloomed nearby, a nod to Eliza. As we stood there, I thought about how much had changed. I'd come to Philly running from a broken life, hiding in code and solitude. Eliza, Tom, and Clara had pulled me out, shown me connection matters more than escape. I'd learned to listen, not just to ghosts, but to people, to the past. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows. A breeze stirred, carrying that faint lavender scent. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I felt her, Eliza, not as a ghost, but a presence, woven into the earth, the air, the story we'd told. A whisper brushed my ear. "Thank you." I opened my eyes, smiling. Tom raised an eyebrow. "You hear something?" "Just the wind," I said, but we both knew better. We left the yard, the house glowing behind us. Eliza was at peace, her story alive in every visitor who read her journal, every flower by her stone. And as I drove away, Philadelphia's skyline fading in the dusk, I knew I carried her with me. Not a burden, but a gift.